Performative lesbianism. So let me just say right off the bat, this is not at all a open dialogue for any kind of biphobic conversation. This is not an open dialogue to, disrespect people who are bisexual, because I do not mean them. But I do want to say that off the top, because I feel like when we talk about performative lesbianism and you talk about these things, and the way I'm going to describe this and show examples and, talk about what I'm talking about. But I did want to say right off the top that I don't mean to suggest that it is beyond the idea that the people in which I'm talking about are necessarily not bi or bi-curious or, any kind of thing like that. But this is specifically using lesbianism for clout, basically, or for shock value in some cases. I am going to steer clear of the shock value ones just for the sheer fact of I think that is way less common now because there isn't really that shock factor. But I do feel like using lesbianism specifically for the male gaze and for attention is something that is still common and that is still seen. And what got me thinking about this was I was watching a music video for one of my favorite songs, which is Kylie Minogue's Sexercise. Amazing, amazing song. I probably cannot play clips of this video because it's like age restricted on YouTube, so I don't even know how that would go. But essentially, a lot of the theme of this music video is very, some might say homoerotic, lesbo-erotic, I guess is also an alternative there. But it is very like, it feels very playing to a certain gaze for attention, basically. I don't know anything about Kylie. I don't know anything to suggest that she is bi. So I'm not trying to say specifically that she is doing this in a malicious way, because I firmly believe she's been a very big advocate for the queer community as much as Madonna has, who has also used lesbianism, but in her case it was for shock value by kissing Britney Spears at the VMAs. So that is a subject that is important to talk about as singers using performative lesbianism for a purpose, but I feel like shock value is a little bit different, whereas the performative lesbianism specifically that feels like it's for the male gaze is an entirely different thing. And while I was watching this music video, I thought, this is so interesting because I've enjoyed this song for a long time. I always found, it's very steamy, it's very erotic, whatever. But now looking at it under the lens of an actual lesbian, I'm like, oh shit, this does give you very performative for a certain audience. You're doing it for the aesthetic appeal or for the visual enjoyment of men, essentially. And it's the same thing with the song I Kissed a Girl by Katy Perry. She literally got her start in performative lesbianism, and people have talked about this to death, especially with that song in particular. And I have very mixed feelings because with both of these singers and both of these songs, I really enjoy both of these songs. I can't deny that I love the song I Kissed a Girl. I've loved it since it came out. I've loved all of those songs on that album, and they do not age well, any of them. There's fully a song called You're So Gay. So which is about, by the way, the whole crux of that song is that her boyfriend is so gay but doesn't actually like men. So it's using gay as a pejorative. So it's really doesn't age well in every context of that particular song. And the whole album, I think, ages really, really poorly. But that's not the crux of this video. That is a whole other video. Not one that I will make, but a whole other video anyway. But yeah, so, viewing these things now under this lens as someone who is a lesbian, under this lens of someone who understands how these things are portrayed and how things are very often lesbian stories and lesbian life is pushed under this narrative of purely for men's enjoyment, purely for men's entertainment. Certainly lesbian porn for years has been exclusively, it's made for men. It is not made for actual lesbians. It doesn't involve us 9 times out of 10. And so it shows. Now, the reason I initially thought, that was going to be kind of the crux of what I had to say was because for me, I was like, okay, I'm talking about it in a media sense. And we don't really see it in a media sense anymore. I think it's something that's probably moved on to a TikTok world and an Instagram world. I think social media has taken it over. The song I Kissed a Girl is like 20 years old at this point, which is nauseating to think about. I think it's like 15 years old, but it's getting up there. And like, Sexercise, which I think was one of the last music videos that I really saw that kind of performative lesbianism in, was all the way back in 2014, which again is still recent, and even 15 years ago is still recent, but relatively speaking is a long time ago. I don't think it can be understated how like these things don't come up as much anymore. I don't necessarily feel like, at least in like pop culture, I feel like we have kind of reached an era where lesbians are allowed to tell our own stories and we are allowed to be seen on TV in a way that's like, this is more than just something that's very clearly for men's attention and for men's enjoyment. But that said, it needs to be said that these things have a real effect on people's lives. There are really people who can view that and view someone kissing a girl for a man's enjoyment and a man's attention and turn that into actual violence perpetrated against a butch or a stud or any kind of lesbian or out lesbian, or even not out lesbian but assumed lesbian, as like, well, I can use you as a prop for some guy's attention. I can use you as a prop for my boyfriend's fantasy or my husband's fantasy. In dating, I think my experience with a lot of dating apps and a lot of lesbians' experiences in dating apps is that a lot of times you will find couples. You will find like maybe a woman's profile, but it says very clearly in there, we're a couple, we're looking to just have fun, experiment, whatever. And again, I want to specify there that I am not trying to say that it is beyond the realm of possibility that she is bisexual and kind of wants to explore that avenue, and that's fine. But I think my personal opinion on the whole thing is, and again, there's nothing wrong with couples wanting to explore together and do all of that. That's fine. But I know it's very frustrating when you are someone who is looking for any kind of relationship that does not involve slipping into a couple's bed for a night or a weekend. You're just looking for an actual relationship, and it's kind of like, it's frustrating that constantly what is seen and constantly there is this idea, and I know bisexual women face it a lot, of like the unicorn, of like, you will come into their bedroom and play out this fantasy for them and then disappear into the ether. And that is something you see a lot, and that is something that does have a very material effect on people, because it again reduces our existence to enjoyment for other people. It reduces our existence to a cheap thrill for someone. It's important to talk about these things because, especially with the conversation about performative lesbianism, this can have very real consequences. When you see someone in a performance setting being like, oh, I'm gonna have this relationship, but not really, of like flirting with or being very sensual with another woman in order to cause a reaction that is very clearly geared toward a certain specific viewpoint. Like, it's not for lesbians, let's be real. Like, maybe there are some lesbians who are enjoying this and getting to enjoy this, but generally speaking, that is not the intended audience for this. It is more of an incidental audience. And so ultimately, as I said, this can cause issues when there are real people who are at stake. It's not just a backup dancer who's kind of a prop for your music video or for your song or for your whatever it is. It's a lot different when it's real human beings who are now having to live with the consequences of that, and there are real people who are experiencing harm because of this and who are being used as props, as despite being a real person, they're being used as a prop for a heterosexual woman just for the entertainment value of her boyfriend or her husband or whatever, whatever, some guy she's interested in that isn't even dating her, whatever the case may be. And so I do think that that's like something that needs to be discussed. And again, thankfully, I do think it's less of a trope in media these days. I think it's less common in media, but it's something that has happened and does happen, and was something that I wanted to discuss, and something that I was very, very frustrated with, because I can think of all these examples now, and again, looking at it from the lens of being a lesbian, I can think of all these examples now of like, oh, was clearly a performative thing. This was clearly a performative thing. And a lot of it does tend to be more musically related, keeping porn in its own category. A lot of it does tend to be more musically related. A lot of it does tend to be more of like a performance thing. Obviously, can come up in television and film, but it tends to lean itself more towards like music and songs and music videos and maybe even live performances of singers. Again, talking about the Madonna and Britney kiss, that was that was more for shock value. That was during the Bush era, so it was a very hush-hush era for the gay community. But I would argue, I still have kind of complicated feelings about whether or not I think that is included in the conversation about performative lesbianism, because I think that I feel like it was more of a shock value political statement than necessarily for the entertainment of men statement. And that doesn't mean that it's okay because it's for shock value. I think in a lot of ways that makes it worse to a different degree, because it implies that this is something that is shocking. It has a lot of connotations, but again, you have to consider it from not our perspective now, but where we were then. And I do think it's important to note that like, it was very shocking because it wasn't really allowed to be on TV all that much. Even though Will and Grace existed in like the 90s and early 2000s, you have to think that like Will and Grace as a show was very like a desexualized idea of what it meant to be gay. And now, I mean, you think of something like show like Scandal, a show like How to Get Away with Murder, of course, anything with our lovely Shonda Rhimes, you really can have more explicitly gay things that did not exist and were not available to like an NBC show in the late 90s. And so it's interesting how things have changed, and even network television now can get away with things that previously were very, very taboo. So yeah, that's what I got. That's the video. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to comment down below. Subscribe to this channel if you want to see more content, and subscribe to my Patreon because I said so. No, but I really do want to make more content over there. I love Patreon. I love following Patreon, so I would love to have more people over there. Until next time, stay devilish.